Welcome to another Motivational Monday. And today we are going to talk about boundaries. I'm going to read it. When is enough enough? And how do we remain steadfast within our boundaries and be brave and courageous without feeling guilty? No is a complete sentence. Just not in the Afrikaner community, but in the rest of the community, it's a complete sentence. So I'm going to read a piece from Dr. Brené Brown's book, The Atlas of the Heart, where she talks about boundaries. She says, boundaries are a prerequisite for compassion and empathy. We cannot connect with someone unless we are clear about where we end and they begin. If there is no autonomy between people, then there is no compassion and empathy, just enmeshment. Boundaries are the distance at which I can love you and me simultaneously. I'm going to read it again. Boundaries are the distance at which I can love you and me simultaneously. That's very powerful. What is a boundary? A boundary is a wall or an indicator where one person can tell another person, this is how far you can go with something before I start feeling uncomfortable. That is a boundary. And we are going to talk about boundaries today because our previous talk was about when we allow other people to interfere in our lives, or when other people interfere in our lives when we don't even allow it. And if we don't have boundaries, people will interfere in our lives. And if we are not clear about our boundaries, people will not know whether they are actually overstepping your boundary or not. So one of the hardest things, and I've got a very strong personality, but one of the hardest things I've ever had to learn, and are yet in the process of learning, is saying no without feeling bad. Saying no without feeling guilty, and saying no without the need to explain myself, so that I don't feel like a terrible person when I get into bed tonight because I said no to someone else. So she said it so beautifully there. She said a boundary is something or somewhere or something that you can allow in your life where you can love you and another person simultaneously or equally. So it's very important that first of all you know, who am I? What do I want? What is my authentic self? What can I live with? What can I allow? What is acceptable for me? What is my boundaries? And am I happy with my boundaries? So you cannot exert a boundary if you do not know what you are willing to allow and not allow in your life. It's very important. So let's talk about, for example, a friend that is very interfering in your life. Friends can be very interfering. I'm a very interfering friend, I'm proud of it. Interfering people sometimes just don't know your boundary. So a lot of times when clients will come to me and say, my mother is interfering in my life, my father is interfering in my life, my friend is interfering in my life, my sister is interfering in my life, the first thing I ask them is, do they know your boundaries? Do they know your yes and do they know your no? And when you say yes or when you say no, or when you've put your boundary out there, that you make your boundary clear, and are you consistent in your boundary? And this comes very much across when we have children. So I have birthed a professional boundary pusher. He's very professional. So he will continuously come and test the boundaries with me. If I say no, we need to sleep at 8 o'clock, he'll come and say, what about 5 past 8? What about 7 past 8? What about 9 past 8? It is in our innate nature to want to push boundaries. And a lot of successful people and a lot of things that have been developed in the world and a lot of new technology was developed by boundary pushers. People who are thinking out of the box, people who don't look at boundaries, and people who are rule breakers. So I'm not in judgment in any of it, but all I know is when I know my boundaries and I'm steadfast in my boundaries and I can say no without guilt and I can be consistent in my boundaries, the other person will stop irritating me, triggering me, abusing me, threatening me, or meddling in my life. So it's very easy to take the finger and blame and say, you are an interfering friend, or you are an interfering person, or you are doing this to me, when I, in fact, am not exerting a firm boundary. And that is why I have had last week's discussion talking to people who think that they can overstep other people's boundaries. When someone says no to you, it's a no. However, if you say no to someone and they keep pushing the boundary and you keep shifting the boundary, that person is going to continue to overstep your boundary. We teach other people how to treat us. It's not the other person. The other person is not the guilty party. If someone abuses you once, it's their fault. If they abuse you again, it's your fault. We teach other people how to treat us. We are the ones that have to put the boundaries there, be steadfast in our boundaries, and say, no, this is what I desire, and this is what I can live with. When you have made a decision to put a boundary, when you have chosen to put a certain boundary in your life, remember that choice creates awareness, choice creates other possibilities, but choice also creates, what's nagevolge in English? Consequences. So if I choose to put a boundary, for example, with my father, saying to him, you cannot visit me in this time, you cannot do this to Marcus, no, Dad, this is my boundaries. He can then, and I'm using him as an example, he can then choose to honor my boundary or not honor my boundary. If he honors my boundary, we are going to have a respectful relationship where both parties feel simultaneously loved. If he does not respect my boundary, I'm going to have to make the decision to put up the boundary and say no. And then I'm going to have to live with the consequences of what he's going to choose when he reacts to my boundary. But this also works the other way around. If he does not respect my boundary, accept my boundary, he is also going to have to live with the consequences of me saying no and standing steadfast in my boundary. So I cannot resent him if I've put the boundary there and I've made the boundary firm. And he can't resent me if I've put the boundary there and I respect myself enough to not allow certain behavior in my life. So again, I'm going to say it. Boundaries is a very important gift that allows two people to love each other simultaneously. And once we've learned to know and establish what our boundaries are, to be consistent in our boundaries, to live our boundaries from day to day, and to know that our boundary is a choice we make that creates awareness, we will have more expansion and gifts in our lives. And most of all, believe it or not, we are going to have easier relationships with our parents, our friends, our children, our co-workers, our employees, our clients. Because when people know where they stand with one another, that relationship is based on safety, respect, and love. And that is a relationship we want. Because at the end of the day, all we want is ease, joy, and glory with emotional freedom.